There we go. Thank you for that. So this workshop is the first in a series of 3 that works towards our mission. We also do consultations either at the pre-proposal stage or with teams who are preparing a funding proposal, as well as sometimes we meet with them afterwards. So that's kind of our job, is to support research. So I just wanted to go over the agenda for today. We have kind of a packed agenda. We have a lot to communicate. One is just going to be the introduction to research impact. What is that? Connecting societal impact to your research. Talking a little bit about impact categories and how different funding agencies and organizations look at impact. We'll have a very quick break. Understanding your why. So what is your role in impact, in research impact, starting with understanding why you are here at the U of A. Planning for impact, impact identity. So your own identity around research impact, documenting your impact, resources, and then that'll take us through the first 2 hours, and then we have networking. And we do have a few guests who are coming to share and talk about their impact, their research impact in society. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Jen.
Thanks. So when we talk about research impact, historically, it really has been about disciplinary impact, the knowledge generation, the new knowledge you're creating within your discipline. And that tended to be shared with other disciplinary experts through publications, presentations at conferences, peer-reviewed journals, sometimes in the classroom or with just those in your lab or that you partner on projects with. And that never necessarily got out to the general public. So sometimes you hear people joking about this research is too interesting to go to a peer-reviewed journal. The quote used to just say, and die, but that was a little harsh. So yeah, we thought to be really only viewed by others in your discipline largely. And then compare that to societal impact, which is really around the benefits to society and how that impacts communities, groups of social groups, people who oftentimes in the past, some referred to that as foundational research versus applied research, but those lines are really blurring now. And many funding agencies who used to live strictly in the realm of foundational research are also recognizing that society wants to understand how why this research is being funded, how it benefits society. So the second quote here, ask yourself, so what? And then keep asking that. That's the idea, particularly sometimes for researchers who do that really foundational research. It's a little harder for them to go from, well, you know, I study how this molecule interacts with this material. And then for the layperson, okay, like, so what, but for what purpose? And then they get sometimes to the next step. Oh, well, because then I can understand this process in the human body. Okay, well, you know, so what, again, might sound a little harsh, but just getting people to think about, like, for the average person, how do you get to the point where you can discuss the research you do in a way that also shows why society cares about this, how this has the potential to benefit society in some way. And at University of Arizona, there's a whole lot of opportunity to have this societal impact. I just wanted to share our current portfolio numbers. We don't have 2022, obviously, yet. It's not over. But in 2020, our entire research and development portfolio was $760 million. Now, that includes external funders that we're familiar with. It also includes things like the internal seed grants that are funded through ABOR often, but that's our total pot. It's grown by 10 million, 770 million in 21, and the U of A has a goal to get that to 1 billion. I want to say by 2025, it's an ambitious goal, but always trying to increase that. It represents 2,241 active research projects on campus. And they're not all, you know, we often think, oh, it's only tenure or tenure eligible faculty who get these research grants, and that's not true. There's faculty and non-faculty who are PIs and co-PIs. And so there is a lot of opportunity here to realize great societal impact. So just to kind of break it down, because a lot of times when we'll say, oh, we're the Office of Societal Impact, and there's looks like, well, what does that mean? What do you do? What are you trying to achieve? And so just if you think about the word societal, as I was saying before, it's really about society or related to the activities of society or groups who are sort of living in a more or less ordered community. But if you look at all the words that pop up as synonyms, you can see that it's very much about people collectively, common, communal, civil, social, shared, group. So this idea, again, of connecting the impact your research has to the larger society out there, or groups within society. As we get further into it, we'll see that often you're not addressing all of society at once, but you have a certain target audience or target group. And then if we think of the word impact, I've sometimes heard people say, well, impact is kind of a negative word, isn't it? It means like, crashing into something or causing harm through force. So no, it doesn't have to mean that. We like to think of impact. These are also dictionary definitions. So it is just the effect or influence of a person or thing or an action on someone else or another group of people, having a strong effect on something or someone. Now, oftentimes, not all impacts are positive always. Of course, every once in a while, you might have a negative impact. Sometimes you have an unanticipated impact, something you didn't necessarily plan for, but sort of serendipitously happen. But generally, we think of societal impact as those positive impacts, those positive benefits to society that arise from your projects. So understanding, of course, what societal impact is, it's another leap, though, to get to, okay, how do I get there from my research specifically? And it really is the way that either your research directly or the process of doing your research has this contribution to society. So sometimes your research leads directly to a medicine that has a clear benefit to society. Other times, in the process of doing your research, you incorporate things like increased and improved education at any level, K-12, STEM educators, undergraduate, graduate, or you're contributing to broadening participation in your area of research and incorporating opportunities for folks who have not been as well represented in your field. And that looks a little different for every field. Sometimes it's people with disabilities, sometimes it's particular gender or ethnic groups. So it can happen either from the research itself or the process of research and the activities you incorporate into your research project. And of course, any combination of both of those things. So at this point, we want to pause because we're going to shift into a slightly different section, but I think we're all on the same page, right, about what we're trying to achieve here through these efforts. I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Allison next.
I want to make sure if there are comments or questions from ours.
It is. Yes,
It is. Anything from Zoom? Excellent. Okay, so we are going to walk through kind of the big picture of this idea of how do we connect that research with the broader community, the broader society that Jen was talking about. I'm going to start with some really big stuff. And as we go through today, you're going to see smaller and smaller and more detailed of how we do that. So let me just walk through kind of the big pictures here. Okay, go for it, Michelle. Okay. So there's a number of different ways, as Jen was talking about, of linking your research to this idea of society and then having impact on society, but they kind of follow a really general but similar pattern. One, you do good research. When we're doing engaged scholarship, collaborative research, applied research, I want to really stress, we still have to be doing excellent research. We still rely on building new knowledge and doing our work in at the highest quality. So even when we are, working in a slightly different, different mode than sort of basic or foundational research, we still have to be doing excellent research, right? Like the knowledge that we produce has to be excellent and at the highest quality and useful. And then we're going to connect that in some way to society. And that's what we're going to be talking about more today. The folks then that have been involved in your research or picking up your research and using it, they're going to use that, right? It's not necessarily us that is enacting this, but those are the folks that are going to use it. And then that research is going to change something for that person or for the organization that's been involved, a community, or even an ecosystem. So there's just like the big overview, right? Where things are, where we see differences and sort of flavors of how we interact is that number 2, right? How we connect with society. And there's like a million ways to do that. So I'm going to show you a few of those. Okay, so we can think of those connections, the way that we're connecting is impact pathways. How are we, taking a path from our research to some sort of to our societal partners, and then they're using it in society, or we are collectively using that in society. Okay, this I'm drawing from some great work by Raina Muhonen and colleagues. They did this huge scale study of all of these different engaged research, and they kind of broke it down to, okay, here's 12 different impact pathways. I'm going to start with the very top one. This is kind of our standard. Sometimes this is called the loading dock. We do our research, we write our paper, that's our output. We hope somebody picks it up, a policymaker, a practitioner, somebody finds our fabulous research paper, and then they use it. Very linear model of science, kind of an old school vision of how science influenced society, but it's still out there. So the loading dock is the idea that we do our research, we put it on the loading dock, and somebody else picks it up and takes it from there. So let's move on from the loading dock. Okay, this is another way, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this today. This is this public engagement pathway. So we do our research as researchers, and then we engage with a public audience in some way. So maybe it is by working in classrooms, by working, by giving public lectures. There's, media. There's a bunch of ways that we can think about engaging with the public. Couple of possible paths there. So somebody who's been involved in that, who got to interact, picks it up, some member of the public, and changes something about their behavior or their decisions, their practices, and we see an impact. The other way is that sometimes the public then, puts a little pressure on policymakers, elected officials, and we kind of get, we get policy change that way. So that's another pathway through public engagement. And then the third one is, and this is just 3 of the 12, I just wanted just a few examples. The third one is much more of this research engagement pathway. And this is when we've got we've identified a need in society. There is a problem that we need to solve. And we really work a research question around that. How can I structure my research to really contribute to solving this problem? Then we want to see researchers really engaging directly with the people who are involved with that problem. That could be community members, pollution in a community. How do we address, a polluted stream in a community by working with the community? It might be policymakers. It could be resource managers who are dealing with a tricky problem. This is a lot of the work that I do, with climate change. How are we gonna make changes so that we're changing the way that we're working to protect species with climate change? And we have to have lots and lots of back and forth, and we're really engaged throughout the process. That makes that research that we eventually do much more directly applicable to the problem, and then we get our impact because it's easy to use. It can get put into plans and policies. It can get used much more easily by our partners. So just kind of a quick overview of those pathways. And I think back to Jen.
at this point, you know, what we've talked about is super broad. You're probably thinking like, oh my God, I could take this a billion different ways. Where do I even get started? Like, you know, there's many opportunities. So we're going to start to help show you how some agencies categorize this or create these sort of broad categories of impact that'll help you sort of situate where your research and your passions might fit best. So we're going to start with the National Science Foundation. That is the US agency that right now and for some time has had a very strict review criterion. When you write a proposal to NSF, the reviewers are asked to equally judge the intellectual merit of that proposal as well as the broader impacts. So I want to walk you through this a little bit because it's kind of an interesting history. So does anyone here know when the National Science Foundation was first formed? Little pop quiz, little trivia. No. Close, very close. It was 1951. And Alan T. Waterman was the original chief scientific. He was a chief scientist at the Office of Naval Research. He was named the first director of the National Science Foundation. And so some of you may see they still give the Alan T. Waterman Award as like the highest award for an NSF funded research project. So it was formed in 1951, but in 1950, and it had a budget of $225,000. And if you compare that to, I meant to look up what the actual budget for the NSF is today, but obviously it's in the many millions, if not billions. So they started off with $225,000. In 1952, they awarded their first 28 research grants. And the big one was $10,000 that went to like the National the Institute for Cancer Research. So that was the beginning. And basically up until the 80s, reviewers were asked to judge proposals using 4 criteria. And really broader impacts, or what at that time they called the non-technical aspects of your proposal, were sort of only used as a tiebreaker. Like if we have 2 equally fantastic, innovative, technical proposals, you know, maybe the tiebreaker is those non-technical impacts, but there was no requirement. There was no real definition of it. So the original 4 criteria, just to help reviewers, in 1981, they narrowed it down to research performance, competence of the principal investigator and the institution, the intrinsic merit, disciplinary merit, intellectual merit of the proposed research, the utility or relevance of the research, and the effect of the proposed research on the infrastructure of science and engineering. So it was starting to get a little bit towards some of those possible impacts, but it was still really kind of loosely defined. And in 1996, there were a number of surveys that said, you know, reviewers don't really know how to weigh these, how to judge these, how to analyze and review on these. So it was at that time when they made it those 2 criteria, intellectual merit and broader impact. But turns out people still sort of had a hard time defining broader impact, understanding what it is. So Congress and some of the committees started putting in place NSF policies around programs that encourage the full participation of women, minorities. And they ended up with this archived list, these kind of 5 bigger categories. And you'll see the wording was still sort of loose, like benefits to society may occur if education are applied. We want to enhance infrastructure, broaden dissemination to enhance science and technological understanding. So that's why a lot of times you would have to put a dissemination plan in your NSF proposal. But again, it was largely disseminating to other disciplinary experts, to other scientists in your field. It wasn't really getting at the idea of public science literacy or knowledge dissemination. So in 2010, as we were trying to come out of the recession, Congress passed the America Competes Act. And it made these a little stronger. It started to talk about national security, economic competitiveness, increased public scientific literacy. It tightened it a little. It was the first time it really talked about partnerships between academia and industry, which, as we know, is really big now. Then in 2017, the American Innovation and Competitiveness Act was passed. So it tightened it a little more. It expanded on a little more. It started adding advancing the health and welfare of the American public. And so as these were passed, NSF continually updates. It's the PAPG is the proposal. I always forget what it stands for. Proposed something policies and proposal guide. Anyway, someone out here probably knows. I always forget it, but we just call it the PAPG. So they update it every year. And so this is currently what it says about categories of broader impact. So the one that is the most common is the top one, improve STEM education and educator development at any level. And now starting to morph into these words around workforce development. So this includes, this is NSF, so that's why it says STEM. When we talk about societal impacts more broadly, it reaches beyond STEM, of course, but this is National Science Foundation. So K-12 teachers and students, community college, undergraduates, graduates, all levels. And that's oftentimes an easy shift for some folks who are new to this work, because they can incorporate sometimes a little bit of research into a course they're teaching at their institution. Sometimes people just really want to work with K-12 and K-14 to sort of this idea of better preparing the students that will be in their classrooms in a few years. So that's the one at NSF that's the category that the most number of proposals address. But you see the second one now says full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities in STEM. So we've gone from broadened participation of underrepresented groups, kind of ill-defined, what does that mean? To now we want to strive for full participation of those groups. Very much emphasis on this idea of enhancing infrastructure. So using those funds to buy equipment, to create labs, to create infrastructure that will endure, and partnering with industry and academia so that we are preparing our students for jobs in this field, not just for content knowledge, but what are you going to, how are you going to translate that into a job? Of course, increased public scientific literacy and public engagement with science and technology. I think we've all seen what happens when we live in a world where people don't take science seriously, they don't have full belief, they don't have those high levels of scientific literacy. So public engagement is still critical. And then the last one is this sort of overall improved well-being, whether that comes from economic security, national security, AKA defense, and just well-being of society. So even though NSF doesn't typically touch on the health sciences, of course, that's the National Institutes of Health, but still this idea of improved well-being. So some of the artificial intelligence and fourth industrial revolution topics that are coming out now, smart cities, smart and connected cities, some of those things certainly fall into that last bucket. So that's a little bit of how the National Science Foundation, again, who right now is the one US funder who has a very well-defined, very explicit definition and criteria for this, has handled it over the years and how it's now approached. And I'm going to turn it over to Allison for some other frameworks that are out there.
Okay, so NSF is the really big science funder in the US, and as Jen said, they've really developed their definition and their understanding of broader impacts. We wanted to share some other frameworks and other ways that universities outside of the US are doing this, because to be honest, the UK, the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, some of our colleagues beyond our borders are really far ahead on this stuff. And they have been very explicitly tying expectations of federally funded research to positive impacts on society for a number of years. And I'll show you a few examples of that. So we just wanted to say, look, there's some really neat and innovative stuff going on out there that goes even further than NSF and some of our domestic funders. One of which is using the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for understanding or describing the way that your research is connecting with society. Are folks generally familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals? I'll real quick description. So in 2015, these were created by the UN General Assembly as sort of as a set of goals to work toward the end of poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all by 2030. We've got 8 years. So they describe 17 goals. Each one of these, if you go to the UN, if you Google Sustainable Development Goals and you find this, each one of these has really rich descriptions of what they mean and sort of, various ways of contributing to this goal. So this has become kind of a common framework internationally that universities are using to say, hey, we're really making progress on sustainable cities and communities, or, our big thing is decent work and economic growth. One of the things that that universities will do is pick one of these and become sort of a center of excellence for a particular sustainable development goal. So focus, on one or a couple, or they're just using this to describe the way that, put all of their research into these bins to say, hey, we're really making, we're really shifting things and we're really making progress on that. There's a lot of benefit to having that sort of common language. It becomes a little bit of a shorthand and you can sort of easily compare and contrast what a particular university is doing or where their research emphasis is. So there's something to be said for that common language. I just want to say with these though, that these describe sort of the area in which you're having impact. They're not really telling you a lot about how you're having impact and how are you changing things in responsible consumption and production. So it's sort of it's partway there and it's a really nice framework to think about, but it's not the whole picture. But I want to make sure that it's out there because it is becoming a much more common way of describing our research. So okay. When I said that some of our colleagues across the pond, as they say, have been really moving forward on this. In the UK, they have something called the Research Excellence Framework that is a required part of academic life in United Kingdom universities. This is a broad scale assessment of all research and education activities that are funded by the government in the UK. It happens on a 7-year cycle. Basically, every 7 years, your department or your college would sit down and complete its report to the REF, and it encompasses not your basic research outputs, but also there is 25% of everybody's score is about impact and how research that happens in that department or college is having societal impact. And you do that through case studies that are then evaluated by an external panel. This is just a nice, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I wanted to highlight because Jen was saying, NSF focuses very much on that STEM, but this is a really broad scale effort. So they're looking at a whole bunch of different categories where you can describe having impact. So impacts on the health and well-being of people and animal welfare. Impacts on creativity, culture, and society. So this is great when we're thinking about across an entire campus and really getting everybody involved. Yeah, we want to see, positive impacts in culture and creativity. Impact on public policy, law, and services. And impact on practitioners and delivery of professional services, enhanced performance or ethical practice. So helping practitioners out in the world actually improve their own practice is a great way of demonstrating impact. So that's the REF. There's costs and benefits to this. It's a very challenging and time-consuming process. But what the UK government has said is we're committed. If we're paying for this research, and we want to make sure that it's really connecting to society in the way that we would expect and anticipate. So it's another one to kind of explore. Outside, Ireland does its own thing. So University College Dublin has come up with its own way to describe and categorize its research. So I just wanted to share this as yet another example. They have a really nice research impact toolkit if you want to look it up, and their categories. So we've got that cultural category again. We have an environmental category, the social contribution to community welfare and quality of life and to behaviors, practices, and activities of peoples and groups. And we've got the technology and the health. So lots of different ways. And I just want to point out, you can have academic impact too. That gets back to that idea of the research that we do as part of this process still needs to be of the highest quality. We want to have academic impact and we want to contribute to our disciplines. We just also want to combine that and tie it to these broader and societal impacts. Okay, so this is based on some work that my colleague Gigi Owen, who is here at University of Arizona, and I have been working on. We've taken some sort of long-standing categories of research use, and we've been applying them to how we evaluate and develop impactful research projects. So I just wanted to walk you through this. Our guidebook is something you can look up, or I can share it with you. And we like these because this gets to the point I was making earlier about, if we have those sustainable development goals, we can say, oh, we're contributing to, life on land, we're contributing to sustainable cities. These kinds of categories tell you how and help you even plan very specifically how you're going to contribute. So the first 4 of these we like to think of them as nearer term or sort of immediate term impacts that you might expect to both observe and document in the course of an actual research project. So in that 2 to maybe 5-year range, you can see some of these things happen. And then we get to the bottom one, which is the bigger, like, social and environmental impact. That sometimes takes a little bit longer. So we just put that in italics to just remind us all that, like, you're not necessarily going to change the world in 2 or 3 years. So, but think about these midterm or these immediate term impacts, instrumental impacts. Your research led to tangible changes to plans, decisions, practices, and policies. If you're working with practitioners, resource managers, educators, and you're really helping to make some changes about the way that they're doing their work, and your research is contributing to that, it's a really nice way of saying, oh, yep, I'm moving the needle, I'm moving towards that. Conceptual impacts, your research is contributing to changes in people's knowledge about or awareness of an issue. This is often, and in fact, it's almost always, a necessary precursor to that instrumental impact. If people don't know or they're not understanding, it's going to be hard for them to change behaviors and practices. But we can track that, how people are understanding the research process. Capacity building impacts, contributing to enhancing the skills or expertise or resources of an organization. So if you're partnering with somebody and you're maybe bringing in some new skills, or you're doing some K-12 work where you're introducing new knowledge and new skills to students, that's a really great capacity building skill. And connectivity, this really speaks a lot to what Jen was talking a little bit about, trust. When we start connecting with people and we make long-term connections and building new networks, it says something about whether folks outside of the university trust us. If they want to stay in touch with us, if they keep coming back and asking, hey, can we work together again? Or I have more questions. That's a really nice indicator of trust. And that tells us a lot about whether people are going to be willing to act on the information that's coming out of our research. So then you can combine those with some of those, some like a sustainable development goal or some of those bigger sort of impact areas. So, you can imagine something that goes a little bit, this is my one example. Okay, our research contributed to SDG 15, which is life on land. We collaborated with several local land management agencies to co-conduct research on eradication of a pernicious invasive plant species. After completion of our project, the agencies incorporated the research findings into their management plan. So we've got this connectivity because we worked with them throughout the project, and then we've got they're understanding this and they're using this in their plans and practices. And by eliminating an invasive species from a particular landscape, we're getting towards those socio-environmental impacts and actual physical changes that are beneficial to society. Okay, and if you like this and want to know more, come to the September 20th workshop. Because we're going to get more into how we evaluate and how we sort of dig into this. Okay, and now we're going to pause for questions. That was a lot. Yeah, if anybody on Zoom, if you have questions, raise your hand and Cara could read it out or put it in the chat and we would be happy to. If anybody here has questions or comments or ideas, we'll take a minute. I love when we are perfectly crystal clear and everybody understands everything. Thank you so much. And if we are not perfectly crystal clear, please do interrupt and ask questions.
I do have one question in
Excellent.
the chat. What is the source from that last slide?
Oh, yes. I'm gonna send the, you will have the link to the guidebook. One of the original sources for this research use is also in our resources section. So all of that will be available to our participants. Thanks.
All right. Well, any other questions, comments before we move on? Okay. So we had this slide up when you came in thinking about, well, how do I articulate the value of my research to society? But what if you're asking, what impact do I want to make? Like we heard about the different categories, we heard about the different criteria, but what if you're asking, well, what impact is, like, what exactly is going to be tied to my research? Like maybe you haven't gotten that far. So we're going to back up just a little bit and give you a chance to kind of think about that. And this is just one way to do it. It's called a so that statement. So you can think about your research. I do A, so that B, right? And B is done so that C, so that, and you keep going on with this long sentence until you get to the very end of, yes, I'm doing this because I want to impact this particular thing. It's just one exercise that you can use to really think through, where does my own passion lie? What excites me about my research? Where am I going with this? Because there's a multiple pathways to impact society. So I do have one example. I will offer a coding boot camp for female high school teachers so that they can feel more comfortable teaching computer science courses, so that they can encourage more girls to take computer science, so that we get more females as computer science majors, so that we have a more diverse workforce, so that we have more innovative solutions. That end piece is where your passion should lie. Like, I really want this to happen through my research, right? And this is just one way to do it. And this example is just one pathway that can get there. And so you might want to think, well, does this really match with my passion? So there's a second piece to this. And it's not necessarily linear. I show this sort of in a linear way, but it's really not. Kind of the two pieces of so that statement and asking about your own why do I do this? Helps you to get to understanding your own passion and your own why about your research. So along the way, asking, like, why do I get out of bed every day? I know why I get out of bed. Like, I'm working on something, through my job here at the university, and I'm excited. It gets me out of bed, no matter how tired it was last night, how late I stayed up. I'm excited for a new day because I keep chipping away. That's why, that's what causes me to get out of bed. Why did I choose my field? Like, what excited me about it when I first started this field? Why does my research matter? What is the good that I do every single day? And why should anybody care? So you can sort of combine these two things to come up with your so that statement. If you didn't get to the very so that captures your passion, backtrack a little bit and think about, where does my passion lie and how do I get there? What I like about this too is as you're going down this pathway of so that, you're starting to lay out, what can I do? Oh, can I really do professional development for teachers? Maybe. Do I want to do it? Maybe. Right. But if that's what I really want to do, ooh, I've got a pathway laid out for me. That's maybe my next journey. So I like this, but it takes a little bit of time to work with. Usually you don't get it in the first go. So wanted to give you a few minutes just to think about that. Let me see. Yep.
And I think you can contrast it when oftentimes you bump into someone and they say, oh, tell me a little bit about your research. And we have a tendency to talk about the technical parts of our research. You know, oh, well, I do this or I do that and I work in this department. And so what we're asking is, that's fine to still share that, set that context of what you do. But then, like Michelle was saying, add this sort of why, add this sort of bigger picture. And, you know, many times at the university, I've talked to people about this and they'll say, oh, well, I'm a foundational science, I'm a theoretical scientist. That's not me. And I'll say, well, there still must have been something that is driving you to be curious about this field, to have an exploration in this field. So again, the purpose of this is sort of thinking of that elevator pitch. The next time someone comes up to you and says, oh, tell me a little bit about your research, that you move out of that comfort zone of talking just about sort of the disciplinary aspects of it, but start getting towards and thinking about and sharing the reasons you do this as related to society.
Mm-hmm. So take a few minutes to just think through, would this exercise get you to a pathway for your broader impacts, for your impact in society, for your research impact? Just take a couple of minutes if you're online. And if you have some questions, you can drop them in the chat. If you want to share something, you can also drop them in the chat. If you're here in person with us, if you have questions about it, or if you're like, oh my God, I just found my passion, or now I know how to better articulate my passion, share with us. So rather than it being a 10-minute activity, we're going to just take about a minute or 90 seconds.
And any of our participants on Zoom, if you just please feel very comfortable to raise your hand or drop something in the chat, ideas, or if you want to share anything, we really would welcome that, and we'll make sure that that we hear it.
And originally this was going to be a pair and share activity because we had more people signed up to come in person, but you're all a little spread out. So think about this independently, but we would love to ask a few people who are comfortable to maybe share how they would respond to this sort of a prompt. But we'll give you a few more minutes. And I'd also like to say, there might be some people in this room who don't necessarily strictly identify their project as research, particularly sometimes, let's say in the fine arts, it might be more of a production product. So think of it, or for some people that work sort of in HSI initiatives, Riley's here, it's a funded project that has a knowledge generation component. So don't get caught up in that word research if that's not a word you identify, but think about your funded work. Think about the academic work you do here and put it in that context.
Excellent. Okay. Does anybody first have any questions? I just want to check to see if there's any questions about this. Okay. Anybody have a so that statement that they'd like to share? And totally doesn't have to be perfect, but just kind of thinking through. If you have a so that statement. No.
Okay, I'm gonna break the ice.
Okay.
Maybe follow along. Simon says, okay, a lot of the work that I do is connecting climate science with decision making. So I work collaboratively with natural resource managers, urban planners, and other community level decision makers to share science about climate variability and change so that they fully understand the science and the impacts of climate change in their region, so that they can plan effectively to prioritize the health and safety of their communities, so that our communities in Arizona and New Mexico are resilient in the face of climate variability and change.
Who wants to follow that?
Somebody can do it.
Yeah. 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 Oh. We have a microphone for you, so our online audience can also hear. We have.
Okay, so my research is about understanding foreign accentedness, comprehensibility, intelligibility. These are kind of three speech constructs, so that I can develop models for language teachers to improve those on the part of learners, and also so that NLP, NLP researchers like industry speech recognition can also use those in order to develop speech text or speech text recognition applications.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any other examples?
So I might encourage you to even take that one more step further. So once they are able to develop those technologies, so that like it forces you to consider again that kind of societal need. And those of us not in the field might not understand some of those issues of why it's important to have those things. So, you know, excellent statement. Thank you for contributing and sharing. But I would encourage you to take it like that one or two next step further, thinking about people who aren't as familiar with that type of technology and what some of the issues are that will help overcome and improve society or members of society.
Thanks. And Cara?
Thank you. Courtney Coffey online contributed this. As part of research development services, I am not a researcher myself. That said, the impact of my work is to increase access to higher education so that groups historically excluded from higher ed feel welcome, supported, stay engaged, and graduate.
Excellent.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, yes.
Hello.
Hey.
Let's see. I research what kind of housing circumstances feel normal or abnormal to people, mostly in the former Soviet region, so that when there are disruptions, such as the collapse of the Soviet Union, or more recently, internal displacement because of violent conflict, we understand the conditions under which people can are or are not well integrated into new communities or into new housing circumstances, so that when resources are available to help with reconstruction, for example, after a conflict, policymakers bear in mind kind of local norms around housing when they plan whatever new projects they're planning.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. All right. Thanks so much. Appreciate everybody participating. Yeah. Excellent.
Okay, thank you, Paul from Tech Launch, Arizona, for contributing this as a follow-up. As part of Tech Launch Arizona, our focus is to collaborate with campus inventors to commercialize inventions so that those inventions can make their way out into the world and into people's hands so that those inventions can improve people's lives and create a better world.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this is just one way to get to why do I want to do this? Is this a pathway for me? Is this something that excites me? Is this really why I got into my field? It's just a small exercise. You may have others, but wanted to introduce this. Okay, you have earned yourself a 5-minute break. We will come back at 2:03.
We do have refreshments and some snacks in the back. Please help yourself. If you're not familiar with this building, the restrooms are just across the courtyard that way.
Okay, we're going to get started. We still have the next half of our material and want to make sure that we are ready for networking. So we're going to talk a little bit about planning for impact. As Jen mentioned, NSF has the criteria for both intellectual merit and broader impacts. And they spend a lot of time talking with the reviewers about making sure that not only are we looking at the science, the research that happens, but as well as the broader impacts, and making sure that the discussions are happening about that at the panel review. So the way that NSF talks about it, broader impacts, is the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. And broader impacts may be achieved through the research and education itself, or through specific activities that are directly related to identified outcomes. So with this, as a panelist, as a reviewer, they're really sitting down and looking at what is the benefit to society, and has that been laid out well? Do I understand what this looks like? If they're funded, how likely are they able to achieve their outcomes with the plan that they've submitted to NSF? So those are some of the things that are talked about. And so we want to think about, well, what does planning look like? So I often, when we consult a lot with folks here at the U of A who are getting a funding proposal put together. And I hear a lot of the desire part of this. I really, really feel passionate about A, B, and C, right? Creative and unique, innovative, impactful, evidence-based, broader impacts activities with strong evaluation plans. But the idea is that they have a desire of what they want to do. They want to work with K-12 teachers. They want to work with students that are transferring from the community college. We also have to have this conversation about reality, right? Small budgets, like, do you really have the budget to do what you're talking about? Do you have the resources yourself? Do you have that capacity? Do you know somebody who has that capacity? Lack of expertise. This says evaluation and content, but just a lot of times the plans that somebody wants to do is, I want to go in and talk to a high school class. Great. Have you ever talked to high schoolers? Nope. Right? Or, you know, like, oh, that's what their passion, like they really want to share that. And so trying to come up with a balance here. And then also thinking about time, right? Making sure that you're laying out and including a reasonable timeline for your broader impact. So one of the conversations we often have is, how long is it going to take you to prepare? And let's extend that a little bit to make sure that you're absolutely ready, not only with the content you want to deliver, but with the relationship with your audience, right? So balancing these two things here. And so other questions to kind of think about is, does the activity align with your why? When we've talked about the so that statement, along with these questions about like, what gets me out of bed every day? These activities should align with that. What is it that you want to try? Like, where is your passion in that? Talking about and thinking about what experiences that you have. Have you done this before? Do you know someone who's done this before? Do you know somebody who's currently doing it? The resources, so funding, time, expertise, the audience, right? So whoever your audience is, do you already have a connection with them? Do you know Like, how do you know where they are and how to meet them there? Also thinking about, does this fit with the mission of your department? Sometimes that's an important question to ask. And then, are the activities appropriate for your target audience? This is just a sample of questions, but these are very important to think about as you start designing your broader impacts plan. So again, kind of nailing down, who is your audience? That's probably going to be one of the most important things to think about, is who do you want to impact? And as Jen mentioned, and also kind of Allison mentioned, we talk about like benefiting society, but you really need to start breaking that down. Who in our society, what group, where are they? How do you reach them? So if you are thinking about community college students, well, which one out of which major perhaps? Or are they coming here, or are you willing to work with a student who's going to go to another university, right? So being sort of specific, because once you know that, then you can start thinking about, well, now what activities? Because it might look different if you're thinking about students who are coming here to the U of A compared to a student from Pima Community College who's going anywhere else. And then you want to think of outputs. And outputs here is, I'm thinking about, what exactly can this audience do? What kind of outputs can they participate in? Can they produce, right? So classroom teachers can probably produce curriculum or classroom activities, right? Maybe that can get shared through different schools, different classrooms. That's something they can do. Asking them to build an engineering device, probably not something they can do, right? So depending on your audience, you're going to start thinking about what can that audience do and what's reasonable expectation. And then to think about your outcomes, your short-term outcomes. What does it mean when a teacher can create this classroom activity? Who gets to benefit from that? How is that done? Thinking about your long-term outcomes. Wow, if this really takes off, I'm going to see more students who can do A, B, and C. And then the long-term impact, that really should connect back to your so that statement, to your why, and that's kind of how you articulate your value of your research to society. Yeah. Any questions? This is just like kind of an overview to, this is again is one way, an overview to start thinking about designing your broader impacts plan. Yes. Oh, can we get a microphone over?
So this is some great advice. Let's say that someone in this audience, maybe a month, 2 months, 6 months from now, is starting to work on a grant proposal, and they have these slides, but they don't really remember what goes with it. Is there like a tool, like a builder tool of some kind that, has prompts to help people do this? Are you going to talk about that? Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
Thank you so much. Yes, and actually, we'll see that in a little bit. So I just wanted to back up and just, you're right, it is sort of vague. We will have a tool to use in a little bit, but just wanting you to start sort of thinking about like audience. That's going to be really key, because then you can determine what can they do, what can they produce, what kind of outcomes would I expect for that particular audience, just to kind of get you thinking. I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
Thanks, Michelle. So we're not just checking the box anymore. So a couple thoughts around this. One is NSF has many different directorates. They don't all apply the broader impact criterion exactly the same. But gone are the days overarchingly across NSF where your broader impacts section of your 15-page proposal could be sort of a sentence or two with sort of these aspirational long-term impacts that really had none of the things Michelle just talked about. It didn't have an identified audience. It didn't have any specific activities. Those activities didn't have any specific outcomes that you're looking for. So this is not an activity any longer where even on the smaller research grants, where you can kind of expect your proposal to rise to the top if that's all you contribute for your broader impact section. Again, this is a 15-page proposal. Those are two equally weighted, theoretically equally weighted criterion. Am I suggesting that you spend 7.5 pages for each? No. You know, without that really good, innovative, intellectual merit that's filling a knowledge gap, it doesn't really matter how great your broader impacts are. But on the flip side of that, you can have that really excellent research plan. And like we said earlier, if you have that kind of throwaway statement on broader impacts and someone else who has equally great research ideas has a really well-developed broader impacts plan, they're going to get funded and you're not. And I would argue that this applies to many other funders who might not use the term broader impacts, but they ask for these things in your narrative. They might call it different things. They might not give you a specific section. Like NSF is very clear in the proposal guidelines. You have to have a subheading that says broader impacts that's clearly recognizable to reviewers. Other funders might not be quite that specific, but they are still looking for a robust response to why, you know, and oftentimes they'll say straight up why a taxpayer is going to feel like this research is justified. I get why my tax dollars are funding this. That's becoming more and more important. And I'm gonna find my notes because we'll talk a little bit later about an organization called ERIS that has some of these tools that we'll share. But they did a study just as recently as 2018 and found that the broader impacts criterion is still a little unclear, that there are kind of random judgments in the merit review process. Like I said, they're different among directorates, they're different among reviewers. So that's still an issue. The relative weighting of them is not consistent across the different programs and directorates. Oftentimes broader impacts are used as that tiebreaker. There's still a little lack of clarity about how specifically related they need to be to the research. You'll see some people say, oh, they need to be fully integrated. It needs to be a product of the research. But we know that for many programs, they can be things like building partnerships with industry. Those partnerships will endure long beyond this specific research program. That's what connects you at first, but they're broader than, you know, sometimes we say they're tangential, they're parallel, they're related to your research. So if I'm a physics researcher, I doubt I'm going to create a broader impacts projects around like citizen science butterflies, unless it has to do maybe with how they fly. But you know what I mean? It certainly needs to be related to, but there's still a little lack of clarity. The idea about resources to support broader impacts, you'll hear from us a little later. This needs to be budgeted. If you're going to say, I'm going to run a week-long summer camp for kids and incorporate my content, that's not free. That costs money. Even if you have a partner who has the infrastructure in place, you reach out to Flandreau Science Center, you're really interested in elementary students, they have an elementary science camp. You can work together and partner and incorporate your research. But again, if this is for elementary schools, are you really going to be talking about, you know, the depths of your research at your level? No, but you're going to figure out how generally your discipline, the area of your research can be translated and interesting and impactful to elementary students so that you're changing their awareness, their interest, some of their behaviors, perhaps, depending on what your science area is. And that we still lack ways to communicate well about this. So that's part of what we're doing here. So that's part of it. But then I also wanted to mention that, you know, Michelle and I, our background is a lot, informal ed, working with communities, a lot of K-12 work. I used to work at a science center. So we bring up those examples a lot when we're talking about audience. It's just sort of our natural go-to, but your audience can be industry. Your audience, as Allison said, can be policymakers. Your audience can be lots of different things. So just because we tend to fall back on that in our examples, we certainly don't want you to narrow your scope of thinking about who your audience is. Your audience can be even more specific. So one of the projects that's often brought up in these workshops is a researcher whose name is Nalini Nakimi, I think her last name is. But anyway, she does research on moss on trees in the big picture. I'm going to hamburger this. I should have had something more specific in front of me. But for whatever reason, she decided to work with prison inmates. And she actually taught them about the topic, how to analyze samples. So it was sort of like a citizen science project in some ways, but for whatever reason, she picked prison populations. And that work got so much recognition that it has really grown, and other scientists have taken up that model with their own science. And because it does lead, there is research that shows that it leads to building skills among prisoners that they can then use when they get out of prison, and it decreases recidivism. That's the right word. So, sometimes there's a reason to pick older Americans, people in retirement homes or whatever. So you can think about audience in different ways, but once you think about, okay, I really need to work with industry to do what I want to do, then start thinking about, okay, well, which industry partners? Who do I have relationships with? Who's in Tucson? Does it need to be local? Do I need to be thinking internationally? But once you kind of think about your bigger picture audience that you're interested in, then think in these kind of smaller subsets. So overarchingly, when you're thinking about creating your broader impacts plan, because remember, we're moving away from just a statement that says, I want to change the world in this way, and I know it will happen. You're making a plan, you're putting some details to it, but we still want you to approach it the way you do your research. You're committed to it, you're excited about it, you incorporate creativity, rigor. It's not a throwaway. Partners, we already talked a lot about partners and relationships, and the U of A is realizing how important this partnership aspect is and relationship building is. And we all the time, oh, someone comes to us, oh my God, my proposal's due in a month. I want to work with K-12 teachers. Oh, well, do you already have relationships? What schools are you already engaged with? No, I don't. I've never done it before. So we are actually going to create some internal seed grants that focus specifically on building partnerships and building relationships. And you'll be able to apply for a small amount of money thinking forward. So thinking, okay, my science, I really need to work with these types of industries, but I don't know anyone there. I don't have a relationship with them. So you'll be able to submit a proposal that has money for travel or money for meetings or whatever that looks like or takes, really to build those partnerships and relationships before you go for that external funding. So that's how committed the U of A is to this idea of really building partnerships and relationships. But not everything can be new and transformational and innovative. NSF loves to use those words. But we feel really strongly that broader impacts are a really good way to support existing programs, organizations, efforts, and initiatives. So for example, we have a project here at U of A, Arizona Science, Engineering, and Math Scholars. It's a program that works with a group of STEM majors who are first-generation college students who come from low-income households. A number of the students in there are students with disabilities. There's a lot of intersectionality there. So if someone who really is interested in broadening participation, I'm a geosciences faculty. I know geoscience is among the least diverse of all the sciences. So that's connected to my field specifically. This is an example. I'm not a geoscientist. Although my son just told me yesterday he might want to study geosciences in college. So that was a big step forward. He's a senior already. So knowing that, rather than just, okay, how are you going to convince a reviewer? Oh, sure, I know how to recruit diverse students. I know how to mentor them properly. I can do all that by myself. It makes for, not only makes for a stronger, broader impacts plan to say, I'm going to partner with this program that already has students. These students already have mentors, but I'm going to bring this element to that program. I'm going to create a cohort for geosciences majors who are already in ASEMs. Or my example before about the Flandreau Science Center. I really want to do a summer science camp. I have young kids. They love summer science camps. They would love to see their mom create the curriculum for a week of their camp. I don't know what I'm doing. Partner with someone on campus. So we really do believe in creating support, and that helps to sustain those programs and organizations. Again, it's a plan. It's not just a list of activities. We've all seen proposals that are like, oh, well, I'm going to recruit 2 diverse undergrads to research in my lab. And then I'm going to do a lecture at the retirement home because my parents live there. And then I'm going to do whatever, and it becomes this sort of laundry list. And that not only doesn't show that you have a cohesive plan, it makes it much more difficult to really have those concrete outcomes that Michelle was talking about, and then evaluate if you met those outcomes, if you achieved those outcomes. So we want to avoid laundry lists. We want to have a cohesive plan with partners that we have actual relationships with, that we support with some of the budget. And then again, it should be integrated with your research. Some of us are in fields where it's more of a direct result of the research. But if you're not one of those people, it just should be integrated or topical. So even if you're a physics researcher that researches something quite deep or abstract, or there's only 3 people in the world that study that, you can still achieve broader impact around physics, whether that's, again, the next generation of physics researchers. It's related. You're going to use some of your experience and use some of your general physics content to help make that impact, even if it's not a specific outcome of your research, or, you still have your disciplinary impacts to push that way. So they're related, but they don't have to completely align. So, and again, some of the things we've talked about, we want them to be achievable. A reviewer needs to read this and think, okay, I do think they can carry it off. I think they'll have enough time. I can see they have the right partners. I can see they put the right budget to it. It's substantive. They've identified some outcomes. They're not just making this laundry list of activities, but there's substance there. They've identified those outcomes. They've shown me how they're going to measure them. Which is accessible or evaluative, that you have indicated that you have a way to document or to assess if you have reached those goals. And it's personal. It's back to what we were talking about. It's something you're passionate about. It's something that you have a connection to, and you can articulate that a little bit or demonstrate it a little bit. It doesn't seem completely disconnected. And part of that is through showing that you have these relationships, you have these partnerships. It's not just something very abstract and standoffish and stand alone that doesn't seem to connect to you or your research environment or your lab or the people you collaborate with. And like we said earlier, NSF is certainly not alone in this. These are just a few examples of some of the wording that you'll find in solicitations for other funders. You'll get a copy of these slides. This was meant to just be illustrative, but when you're applying to any funding source, read those solicitations. I can't tell you how many times people come for a proposal consultation, whatever the funder is, and you really can tell they haven't really read the solicitation. Maybe they've read the program synopsis and they're like, I got this, I know what I need. But if you really dig through the solicitation, you'll see these sentences that are asking you to address something explicitly within your proposal. And so you want to be looking for those little sentences and those pieces within the solicitation where that funder is saying to you, I need you to address this explicitly in your narrative and often in your budget. And sometimes, like now, NSF as an example, you'll see solicitations where they have a specific requirement that you must have a broadening participation component. You have to do something to move towards that full participation of people who are absent from your field. And sometimes they'll require like a whole separate 2 pages, 5 pages just about how you're going to broaden participation in your discipline. Those tend to be some of the bigger center level grants or programs that have a very specific community connection. It's not every single one, but that is happening more and more, where they're asking you to be really explicit about either broadening participation or engaging communities. So be aware that more and more of those are coming out. And last but not least, don't wait till the last minute. Like I said, we've all seen those examples where someone is like, I can do this. You're all smart people. Everyone here is smart. You might be able to write a proposal in a few weeks, but that doesn't mean you have a well thought out plan, you have partnerships and relationships established. The broader impacts, and also with broader impacts, not only does it take partners, I can hardly think of any examples where someone would do all of it all by themselves. You always have partners. So you need to include those partners in the proposal writing process. I can't tell you how many times we've seen people say, okay, I'm going to work with K-12 schools. I want to develop a curriculum. I want to do XYZ. They've written it all up. And then they're like, okay, what school can I connect with? Well, that might not be what the school needs or wants. They have ideas. They have expertise. They should contribute to that. They know how much money it'll take. They know if there are special permissions needed. But then also broader impacts always, as we said, have to be accessible. They have to be evaluated. And your evaluator also needs to be in that conversation to help you identify what are realistic short and medium term outcomes. How are they measurable? How might we find evidence for that? So it's important for those people to be part of the conversation as you're developing these ideas, as you're developing these proposals. It's not that you write all the science stuff, you write something up, and then at the very last minute, you ask those people for input. So that's another big reason not to wait till the last minute, not only for your own sanity, but really to properly incorporate all these elements into your project.
Okay. Jen, I think I heard you say a plan. And just as our participant over here who said, is there a worksheet or something? Why, yes, well, there is. And we're going to be coming around with that. So again, this is one way to think about laying out the design of your broader impacts, organizing your thoughts around it. I really like the backward design. I know quite a few, like Jen said, I come from informal education. A lot of us use that to start planning any type of activity. But it's also used in education, and it's just one way that I wanted to introduce to you. So we do have a worksheet just for you to kind of think about, well, how do I organize my thoughts? What would a plan look like? And so with backward design, want to think about one, like, what is it that you want to accomplish? What is at the end of my why statement? Like, I really want to impact this. I really want to make sure that this happens. Oops, there we go. And it also should have the that feeling of, does this get me out of bed every day? Like, is this the right thing? So it's not always going to come out at your first go with this. Sometimes it takes a little while to wrestle with it and see how it feels, see how it fits for you. Is this something that you're really excited about? Right. And the other thing about is what you want to accomplish is you want to start drilling down and being very, very specific about what you want to do and who you want to work with, who you want to impact. Right. Is it just like Jen mentioned, it could be older Americans in a retirement home. Well, which home, does it matter like which part of the state they live in, right? And so you're really starting to think about specifics here. The second piece is once you kind of have a big idea of what you want to accomplish, start thinking about, well, how do I know, like, how could I tell if I've accomplished what I wanted to do? What would that look like? right? And you'll notice that we haven't actually started talking about the activities yet. So backwards design has you start thinking sort of big picture. What do I want to impact? Who am I going to work with? Right. And then the next step is, well, how do I know what would that look like if I accomplished it? Or what would it look like if I fall short of those goals? Right. And start sort of painting that picture in your mind. Well, it looks like, I don't know, I'm going to go back to K-12 teachers. It looks like K-12, we have more computer science teachers who are recruiting more diverse students into their AP computer science class or something like that. Or they are advocating for computer science to start in elementary school and continuing through high school. Right? Like, what does it look like? So once you know that, then you can start thinking like, well, if I want that to happen, let me back up and see, well, what kinds of activities do I need to do? What could I do that would make that happen? Right? The other part of this is, we've been mentioning all along is who else needs to be involved? And the broader the stakeholder that you can think of and include, the better your plan is going to be. That's one of the biggest things that we see is missing in broader impacts plan is have they talked to the school? Have they talked to the district? How do they know that parents want it in their school district? All of those stakeholders that might be involved, right? But also, who has the expertise that you are missing? Who has that extra piece that you need to have a successful broader impacts plan, right? So that's all of the who, and the more, like I said, the more you can name, the better you're going to be. And then what will it take to make it happen? What resources do I need? What resources do you already have? So hopefully funding and time. So also making sure that you're allowing for proper time, but also thinking about the expertise. And that's one thing that we're really good at is helping you find partners to plug in the gaps of expertise. Right. So you definitely have that expertise in your own field. You may want to work with somebody that you don't have experience with. Guaranteed, Jen and I can find you that partner who is the expert in that field. Right. And so putting that partnership together makes for a well thought out plan when NSF reads it. Let's see.
And if I could jump in for a second to think of another type of example. We saw earlier that NSF is also interested in this idea of building infrastructure. So say you're a researcher here at U of A and you have an opportunity to get a really big grant that's going to allow you to purchase a piece of equipment. You're building infrastructure, but how might you take that beyond just your department? How might you incorporate if I worked with some R2 universities who are less well-resourced and they'll never be able to buy that piece of equipment. How might I include them and give them some time to use this piece of equipment or to become familiar with it? Even taking a step further, if I want to kind of incorporate broadening participation, maybe you look for minority serving institutions that are R2s. So you're kind of hitting. So even though you have in your head, okay, I'm going to build infrastructure because look, I'm buying this new piece of equipment. Take it those steps further, like Michelle was saying. Who's another potential audience that is going to be not just checking the box? Sure, of course, you can share it with other people in your department, but that's a way to build infrastructure and incorporate something that might not seem as overwhelming. Some of the things we've talked about probably seem overwhelming, like, oh my God, I can't do that. But sometimes your research lends itself to these other types of ways of reaching out and benefiting others in society. So I wanted to just offer sort of an alternative example.
So at the end, in the last box, like once you sort of read through, okay, I know what I want to accomplish and with who, I know what success would look like. I know how I'm going to do it. I know who else needs to be involved. I know the resources that it's going to take. Then it starts to get easier to say, well, what exactly is the value of your research to society? Right? So all of these steps help you in articulating that, whether you're talking to somebody in person or you're writing it into your proposal. Any questions on that? Anything online? Any questions or comments? Okay. So if you schedule some time with me and John, we will go through a lot of these questions so that we can understand what exactly do you want to do and what resources do you have available to you, what's lacking, and that's where we come in to help. Okay. All right.
All right. So now we're going to switch to something called developing your impact identity. And one of the reasons we want to talk about impact identity is that often in the past, this was sort of approached as like, oh God, I'm writing a proposal. I have to write that paragraph again. And every time you do it, it's a one-off. Every time you do it, you stress about it. And like we talked about, the way universities are measuring impact is changing. It's moving beyond disciplinary impact. Of course, you're still going to have your H-index. You're still going to pump out those publications. That's not going to go away, let's be honest. But this is being integrated more and more into what is valued by universities and expected of you. So instead, think about some of the things we've been talking about all along today, that this is part of your identity. There's some level of consistency of how you're trying to change society. Every time you get a new grant, you're not thinking of it in a different way, but this allows you to build those relationships and sustain them over time because you're fairly consistently working towards something. It lets you think about, who am I as a person? Like Michelle said, talk to high school students. There's some people that would never want to go into a high school classroom. If you know that about yourself, that's not what's going to become your impact identity. Public lectures, that's not for everyone also. Maybe you are someone who really works in this realm of your science really lends itself to some sort of tech transfer or that infrastructure building I was talking about. Kind of figure out what fits for you, what you see as incorporating this into the arc of your career. So you not only have your identity as a disciplinary scientist, this is what I study, this is the knowledge I generate, this is how I'm changing my field, but in conjunction, be thinking about those whys, those so that statements, and that there's some consistency to that. So it's something you like, it's something that fits with your life. If you already, like I said earlier, sort of jokingly, your parents are in a retirement home or what, and that's a passion you have. You volunteer there maybe already anyway. Why not start to include that as part of your impact identity? So we passed out a little worksheet not for you to fill out right now, of course, but for you to just be thinking about some of these aspects of yourself as a researcher, as someone who wants to use your science or your arts and humanities to impact the world and build that into your overarching identity of who you are as a researcher. So again, think of some of these things I talked about, things you like, things that are already hobbies, things you won't ever do. Just to help sort of guide that. And the worksheet is only intended, every once in a while for you to kind of pick up and jot some things down and start to think of this as part of your overarching identity and not just every time I write a proposal, I have to come up with something new. I have to stress over it.
Okay, we're going to shift to, you've done this. You have you were successful in getting your proposal and you've done this project. And we want to think about how you document this, how you describe this, communicate this to others, how you document it for yourself so that you're sort of keeping track of all of the amazing things that you're doing. There's a few different ways to do this. So we're going to share just some tools and resources, ways to think about this. Okay, this was in Nature, you guys. Like impacts hit the big time. An impact CV. Recognizing that, we have an academic CV. Like we list all of our publications. We've got all of that. A different way to think about this is this as a new or separate document or an integrated document where we really start to say, I worked in 5 different K-12 classrooms and the teachers, reported that the students gained these skills, or I've been, I go every week to this retirement community and I get such great questions and folks are really engaged in this. So thinking about documenting that for yourself, keeping that, at the ready so you can communicate this on future funding proposals in your, when you're talking to the public, when you're writing, when you're writing annual reports. So the headings, if you follow this article and you'll get these slides and the link is in there and you'll see that. So, those are the kinds of headings that they recommend in this impact CV. It honestly doesn't need to be this formal either. Keep an impact journal for yourself. Keep a little folder in your email or on your desktop where when you get a great email from somebody that you've worked with saying, oh, I used your, thanks for collaborating. I used your research in this way. Save it. You're going to need it. You're going to want to come back to that. So just get in that habit of recognizing that this kind of impact is just as important as, hey, I got a new citation on that journal article that I wrote. So just kind of a habit to develop for ourselves. Okay, a couple of other tools that are available. Research Impact Canada has a really nice set of guidelines for how to write impact case studies. And so this is a little bit more formal than, just kind of hanging on to emails or even like an impact CV. This is a bigger description of the work that you did in a particular project and how it made changes in the world. So they have Research Impact Canada has a great template. I showed you earlier an example from this guidebook, Planning and Evaluating the Societal Impact of Climate Research. This is something my colleague Gigi Owen and I put together. You can find that. We also have some worksheets and some ways of kind of organizing that into that case study. And that, again, it's a little bit more formal. It's something you can kind of be thinking about for how you might want to describe what you've done in your next funding proposal or performance reviews, etc. Speaking of, okay, this is kind of exciting. So another way that you're wanting to think about how you're talking about your impact, but also frankly, like keeping track of your impact. U of A has some new promotion guidelines, and this is a great opportunity to be thinking about connecting all of this great impact work to your personal growth and development in your career, and taking the next steps. So candidate statements in which you're really talking about how great all of your work is. Some of the new guidance that has been added in the last few years. How does your work contribute to the missions of your department and the university? What is the broader social and economic impact of your program of work? So they're starting to ask for this stuff. So we want to be prepared. So we want to have those impact CVs. We want to have an impact journal. We want to have some case studies at the ready because we're starting to be asked for them. Another thing from the same guidelines, taking an inclusive view of scholarship. U of A no longer just says publications are the only thing that matters here. We want to see integrative and applied forms of scholarship, collaborations with business and community partners, translational research, commercialization activities, and patents. You can interpret this and expand upon that, but they're really asking for that now. So we want to be prepared when we go and put, if you're doing a promotion or a 10-year packet, or you're just having your annual review, recognize that these are the kinds of terms that we're being asked for now, and be prepared. And you're going to have your journal, you're going to have your case studies at the ready. One last piece of this is this leadership and service portfolio. And this is specifically, it's an optional piece when you're doing your promotion packets. If you are in a position where you're doing a lot of extension or administrative or service activities where that's a really big bulk, I wanted to highlight this specifically for this. You can request a letter from partners documenting your research collaborations if that's a major part of the work that you do. That is a wonderful, wonderful thing to keep in your research journal, in your impact journal in the file on your desktop. Go and ask the people that you've worked with if they will write a letter. Describing the impact of your work. That's really powerful. And it's really kind of exciting to see that that's now being incorporated into the way that we are promoted and evaluated here. So I just really want to encourage you to get in these habits because it's going to help. Yeah, I think we handed out the impact worksheet already.
Okay, so we do want to share a few additional resources that can help you do this work. So there is a NSF funded center called ARIS, Advancing Research Impact in Society. Some of you who have been following this work for a while might remember the National Alliance of Broader Impacts. That's what it started out as. This document, I was actually a co-author on way back in like 2013 or something. This was one of the first products they made. And it was sort of guidelines to creating these broader impacts plans. When they got their next 5-year center grant, they changed the name to Advancing Research Impact in Society because the idea was to move beyond broader impacts, which is very NSF specific. And how can this community serve everyone in a bigger and better way? So they have a number of resources on their website, and these are linked in the slides when you get them. So next slide. So they have this entire toolkit. So the guiding principles, like I said, they've created an updated version of this. There's a checklist, a wizard, and a rubric. So when you go to their website, the guidelines are a lot of the things we just talked about. It's bulleted points about things to think about, similar to what we've talked about. But then it's accompanied by a checklist. So once you've kind of written your proposal and created your plan and you think you're ready to submit several weeks before, because you're going to need to make changes, you can go through the checklist and say, check, check, check. Do I have these elements? What might I need to add or revise to my plan? There's also something called a wizard, which is an interactive tool. It's web-based. It does not save any of your data. It will print you out a report at the end, but the data is only locally on your computer. Once you print your report, it's not saved anywhere. But when you go into the tool, I think the next slide has a little detail. So it's a way to have someone walk you kind of through these steps. It's not linear though. So one section is on budgeting, one section is on partners, one section is on activities, one is on evaluation. But you can kind of in an interactive way start plugging your ideas into it. It'll kind of keep them all in place. It lets you kind of go back and forth and think about these sections. And then, like I said, it prints out a report for you. So sometimes it's a good idea to play around with your ideas and kind of get something written out. So I encourage you to just play around with this tool and explore it. And as I said, it's not linear. So there's one about partners, there's one about relevancy. You might not need all this. Budgeting is important, like we talked. But it's an interactive web-based tool that lets you kind of enter some of these details of what you're thinking about, and then it shoots you out a report. And then there's a rubric. So different than the checklist, the rubric is being given actually to NSF panel reviewers so that they have a little more guidance. And it actually describes what an excellent job looks like versus not so great, it needs some work. But you can also use this as a tool yourself, or get some of your colleagues. Can you read my broader impacts plan and sort of score it against this? This is also interactive. So someone can click, 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 click on the scores. It shoots you out a report. And then you can kind of go off and say, oh, I didn't get scored so high on this. Let me work on this. So these are some really good tools that can help you in this work. Allison, were you going to talk about this one?
Yeah, actually, just before we jump to this, I want to say that the ARIS tools, they were crafted specifically for NSF, but that doesn't mean you can't use them for other things. Some of those are just really basic, thoughtful things to work through. Have you got enough money? Have you answered this question? So if you're working on a proposal for something else, still hop in there. And, you know, it might not be exactly your funding agency requirements, but in terms of just helping you think through all of the steps of how you're going to develop a collaboration, it's quite amazing. So I encourage you to just go in and play with it. I already mentioned Research Impacts Canada. They have also another wonderful set of tools, a little bit broader. Again, we're moving away from that NSF specific, but they have some really nice guidance. They use some slightly different terms than we do. So, you know, be familiar also, you know, I'm Canadian, so they use Canadian spellings. But so they're going to talk about things like knowledge mobilization, and what that means is how people are taking research and using it in society. So some of the words are a little bit different, but I encourage you to just check out their website because of that slightly kind of broader view than NSF specific. Lots of good stuff in there. And then because, you know, at my heart, I am a researcher. If any of this has really sort of piqued your interest, we compiled kind of a list of some of our favorite, you know, the scholarship of this work that's out there. I mean, there are entire fields about research impact evaluation and collaborative research and societal impacts of research. Don't expect anybody to be able to read this. You guys will all have access to these slides afterward if any of this looks interesting. So we just wanted to make sure that that was available.
Okay, so thank you. We actually have there we go. We'll be in the slides, but we would love to have some feedback. This is just sort of in between. We've now sort of finished this part of the workshop before we transition into our networking. So I'm going to leave this up just for a few minutes. If you want to scan it, grab the site, give us some feedback. It shouldn't take too long.
Yeah, I think we also have a couple of minutes if there are any questions or ideas or anything you want to toss around before we kind of move to the next.
Yeah. Oh, microphone.
I'm just sort of coming off the heels of writing an NSF proposal. And I just wanted to get other folks feedback on something that I do when I'm thinking about broader impacts is that 15 pages is not a lot of space. And especially for the methodological rigor that NSF really demands, you have to dedicate, I mean, my experience is you have to dedicate a substantive number of pages to just talking about methods. So I tend to integrate the broader impacts activities throughout and language throughout the proposal, and then still have a broader impact section, but it can become much shorter because in essence, I'm just referencing back to those things that have been integrated throughout. And so I'm curious if in your all's experience, that is an okay approach.
So one thing I want to say up front is that it makes it so much easier for the reviewers to read it and understand what you want to communicate and how the broader impacts integrates with your project. It makes it a lot easier, and it also tends to create sort of a storyline of what does it look like for the participants to go through your project, right? Because now we get a richer picture. So that's just my perspective.
And also what I've seen is then when folks get to that broader impacts section with the heading, you know, we showed you several categories. You certainly don't have to address all of them. One category is fine, but sometimes you have hit on a couple of them. So I've seen lately a lot of people having great success with when they get to that broader impact section, they have some subheadings.
Mhm.
So these are my broadening participation impacts. These are my, improving education impacts. This is my impact that directly results from the research. Like if you hit on a few of them, you have like these kind of subheaders and little short things. And then really it's stuff they've already read and you're just kind of bringing it back home. So it's like kind of summarizing and the reviewer's like, yes, I remember reading about that. Yes, I saw that in the proposal.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay. You can still ask questions later. All right. Yeah, come on up, Allison.
Okay. No, I just didn't want to hold things up. So to kind of kick off the networking and just encourage some conversation and new questions, we invited some guests from different departments, different projects across campus to give a really quick introduction to the kinds of work that they do with impact and provide a little bit of example. And then what we would really love is for all of you to strike up conversations with our guests and with each other. We'll have some additional snacks out in the courtyard. Because we're doing things in a hybrid way, bear with us for a minute or two because one of our guests is on Zoom and several are here. And so we want to start with some really just brief introductions from our guests, and then Michelle has organized us very well. So we have as I've been said, in alphabetical order by first name.
Yes.
Greg Garfin is on Zoom. John Shidley is here, I believe. Katrina Miranda and Teresa Crimmins. And in that order, I think we'd like to have our guests just pop in and just give us a really quick overview, because I promised that you didn't have to prepare anything. So we'll start with Greg, who I think is online. Can we have a way to maybe, Cara, can we get Greg?
Can you hear me there?
It's unmuted. It's unmuted. It's unmuted.
Yeah, hello. Hi, folks.
Greg, if you're there.
I am here. Can you hear me?
We don't know what to do if we unmuted that.
Hey, let's do this.
And
We'll start
Greg.
with John, and then we're going to circle back to Greg in just a second with our technology. Yes, I can.
Start? Or?
Just, yeah.
Hi, so I'm John Shively. I'm a professor in the physics department. I'm a experimental condensed matter physicist, which means I study semiconductors and other new types of materials at very low temperatures and extreme environments. About half of my research grants are NSF, and the other half are Air Force Office of Scientific Research. Typically, I spend most of my time thinking about, broader impacts and integrated, broader impacts research plans for my NSF grants. The Air Force is a little bit different, which I'll talk about separately. And again, most of my, broader impacts, I usually spend some time directly discussing, the impacts of my work, which relate to developing new types of computing technologies, which I typically discuss, and a lot of this, some of it's very obvious. Just new computing technologies can make better, faster computers, perhaps more energy efficient. For several years now, I know NSF and other funding agencies like Department of Energy have been interested in lower energy consumption computing, and we're getting a lot about these big data farms that are using absurd amounts of energy, and doing some moonshot type investments in things like quantum computing and related fields to try to see if anything will make a dent in kind of this ballooning energy costs associated with that work. And so again, the way I've typically found out about these things, some of it is indirect and others is just whenever I was invited to go to one of these NSF workshops, I say yes, and whenever I've been asked to be on an NSF panel, I say yes. And then, I don't know, at least in my experience, once you go through the panel process a few times, it starts to become easier and easier to figure out just what to put there that will review well. Now, my work is almost entirely experimental, so I'm always bringing in undergraduate researchers, and so I always am, fairly specific about how many students, for certain programs, for certain programs, they actually want you to budget money to fund undergraduates, and sometimes we can include high school students as well. Other programs, they actually want you to go through this RU supplement, and it's program specific. Like the engineering funded ones, they want us to keep the budgets as lean and then apply for supplements, whereas the ones that are funded through DMR or like essentially materials research, they want the latter. They actually want you to fund that, and they don't want to fund RU supplements. I don't actually understand why, but so just ask program officers. And so the other thing on campus, there have been some really great programs I've been involved in. The ASEMS program, which I think has only grown, and so collaborating with them, it's also if you haven't had an ASEM student, they're absolutely fantastic. They're some of the best undergraduate researchers I've had in my group. And again, directly tying that into the broader impacts of bringing students in, giving them research opportunities and direct mentorship. I mean, I think of the ASEM students, I've had both of them have gone on to PhD programs, and pointing to evidence whenever possible. And then also there's this really great program that is run through Bio 5 called KEYS, which is this, and I just actually got an email. So the KEYS program gives summer research internship opportunities to usually very good high school students. And they've launched a new program, which I just got an email about. I can't remember. I think it might be called the STAR program. Someone knows more than I do. And I think this is now pulling the KEYS students into research throughout the semester, because most of those students are, juniors going into their senior year. And so I just learned about this a week ago, so I don't know much. But again, tying that in, talking about a lot about workforce development. My area, many of the students who graduate from my group and related, groups go on and work at, Intel, Apple, so on, places like that, and just emphasizing we're training, workforce development, high tech jobs that keep the U.S. Superior in some way. This is this type of stuff I talk about all the time in broader impacts, and that's also that's kind of the NSF side, but a lot of that last part, the workforce development, training high tech workforce, that I always emphasize even in my Air Force grants, and that's really what they care about. They don't seem to care so much about high school students. They typically like you to, or they don't discourage including undergraduates, but they really want high tech workforce, people who will go work at the DoD labs as well as high tech industries. And again, I heard a little bits of this. I mean, in NSF, I always have a very easy to find section on broader impacts. And I'll have other stuff throughout the proposal, but I can't. For those of you who haven't done an NSF panel, it's insanely fast. You have I don't know, 7, 8 proposals you read, and there's a lot of people glancing through things, and you get the feeling like they never really read the proposal. So making everything as easy as possible to find, and giving as much ammunition for the person. There's one person who is actually presenting the proposal to the entire committee, and making it very easy for that person to find things and point to it. Oh no, they covered that here. Because if you don't, they'll find something that you might just have overlooked, and it's frustrating, right? When you get a bad review back, it was in there. They just didn't read my.
Thank you, John.
We're gonna have some time for discussion.
Yeah. Let's give it a try. Oh, sure, Greg, if you can hear me, can you unmute and see if we can hear you now?
Yeah, how's that? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Super. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to join you. I wish I was there in person. So I'm going to talk well, let me tell you, my background is I'm trained in climatology, and I've worked a lot of the last 15 years on adapting to a changing climate. So I'll speak about one project called Framework for Addressing Cultural Resource Vulnerabilities in the National Park Service Intermountain region. So the funding came from the National Park Service. The problem was really to do a systematic assessment of climate change effects on cultural resources. For example, historic buildings, archaeological sites, archaeological landscapes that have artifacts in them, and then develop processes for prioritizing Park Service response to those effects and identifying actions. And our goal was to develop a vulnerability assessment framework and also a process for responses. We worked with multiple units in the National Park Service, including the Park Service Intermountain region, which stretches from Montana down to Texas, the Park Service Vanishing Treasures program, which is focused a lot on archaeological resources. We worked with other cultural resource researchers, such as University of Pennsylvania and Boise State University, other Park Service staff who are developing vulnerability frameworks, and the Park Service Climate Change Response Program. And we did a number of different kinds of activities, including scientific research. We ran several kinds of workshops to bring people together to think about how to develop a coordinated, consistent vulnerability assessment framework, how to assess in particular an issue called sensitivity to climate change exposure. We also had workshops on using scenario planning to develop those climate change strategies. And ultimately, we also developed several working groups in cooperation with our partners in the National Park Service. So the tangible outputs of our work included an online interactive tool that we call CRAVAT, the Cultural Resource Environmental Vulnerability Assessment Tool, as well as a number of reports, a set of guidelines and data. And the impact of our work, the instrumental impacts, included the development of the CRAVAT tool, which allows Park Service employees to go in and look at things on a really long-term timescale of several, multiple decades, to look at climate change effects and how those might relate to resources in their parks. And we did that in association with a team that has developed a rapid assessment tool that's looking at kind of how day-to-day weather affects these cultural resources. The conceptual impacts included developing vulnerability assessment, especially a methodology for assessing the sensitivity of cultural resources to various climate impacts. And this was really important to develop in the interior West. If we compare that to the Park Service Eastern units, they're mostly concerned with the effects of sea level rise, which is a lot more straightforward than intense precipitation, drought, changes in the daily cycle of temperature, where we, as you know, we can have really high temperatures during the day and freezing temperatures at night and so on. And then the demonstration of scenario planning as a valid process for assessing cultural resource strategies for climate change. Capacity impacts, we spawned a cultural resources vulnerability working group, a scenario planning initiative for cultural resources, and this online tool has been used in scenario planning training for cultural resources. And then our connectivity impacts included that our cultural resources vulnerability working group connected multiple natural parks or National Park Service regions that weren't necessarily talking to one another. So we helped facilitate connectivity across the Park Service. And then also we helped connect the Park Service with Indigenous partners who are interested in cultural resources on Park Service lands, and developed an Indigenous partners cultural resources working group.
Wonderful.
Thank you
Oh,
so much, Greg. And you can see Greg. Greg is familiar with the framework that I showed you earlier. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Katrina Miranda. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. When I was an assistant professor, I was lucky enough to get a research experiences for undergraduate program funded by the NSF. And that really changed the trajectory of my career in a lot of ways. In one way is that experience led to a broader outcomes section of my career proposal to the NSF that reviewed very well. And for that reason, I've been involved with RII for a number of years in helping people develop their career grants and proposals. So that's something that I'm definitely able to continue to do. And after that, I did that for 6 years, and then we weren't renewed because SB 1070 became a thing here in Arizona. And so no minority students wanted to come to Arizona as the Papers, Please law, which fortunately has sort of fallen out of everybody's memory. So we stopped doing the RU program, and shortly thereafter, I was took me a couple of years, but I was able to get funded by the NSF to have a scholarships in STEM program, which supports. It's actually the only program in the country that is focused primarily on that the single most important parameter is that the students have financial need. And then there are other aspects to it. So we're in the end of our 5th year, and we'll be putting in a new proposal for that next year. But this program is designed to support students who would normally be in the workforce while going to school. Instead, they have scholarships, and so that at least reduces their need to work, and they can then be engaged in some of the extracurricular activities that will prepare them for graduate school, which is, of course, NSF's focus here. So many of them still do work, but they're able to do research. They get all kinds of trainings, professional development trainings. This program is actually under the ASEM's umbrella. And I don't think we would have reviewed as well if ASEMS hadn't already been a program here. And more recently, I've taken over there's a long-term MARC program, maximizing access to research careers, which is largely for minority students. This is funded through the NIH. And it's a fantastic program. It supports students in terms of their tuition. They get a stipend, they have 2 years of support, and the whole goal is for them to go to graduate school or MD, PhD programs in biomedical research. So those are 3 different student success programs focused on undergraduates to help primarily underrepresented minorities and first generation and low income students be successful here at U of A and then go on and be successful in the STEM workforce.
And while we're switching the microphone, I happen to be the evaluator on Dr. Marana's STEM program. And she, as part of that program, teaches a 1-unit sort of student success course. And what I hear over and over and over from the students is how valuable her mentoring is. Through teaching that 1-unit course, they really get to know her on a more personal level. A lot of us say we mentor students, but over and over and over, it comes out how valuable it is, not only for the things you might think of, like letters of recommendation, but just Katrina's willingness to pivot when COVID happened and talk about mental health issues in the classroom. So really thinking about mentoring as a broader impact and taking that beyond sort of the usual expectations. I just wanted to throw in that.
How about that?
Yeah.
All right. I noticed there was people online, so I thought I'd come down here. I'm Teresa Crimmins. I am a research professor in the School of Natural Resources and the Environment, and I'm the director for a program that's based here, but is national in scope, called the USA National Phenology Network, which is a name I hate, honestly, because no one knows what phenology is. But I swear you do. You just don't know that word because it's an awkward word. It refers to when seasonal events in plants and animals occur. So when do our creosotes tend to flower, or when do migrating birds show up, or when do we see desert tortoises come out of their habitat, their hibernation in the spring. And we care about these things because they are good indicators of how species and ecosystems are responding to changing climate conditions. So our organization exists to collect, store, and share data and information on when these things are happening on all sorts of different species, on all sorts of different seasonal events across the whole country. And so, and we do that because this data and information is really valuable for, again, scientific discovery. So scientists use this information and it's referenced in like the National Climate Assessment and that kind of thing. It's really important for supporting a lot of kinds of decisions. So understanding when to maybe plant or harvest a crop, or when to treat for different invasive species, either insects or invasive plants. For human health applications, things like when's the allergy season really going to kick up because the plants are starting to release pollen. When you might want to go visit the DC tidal basin because the cherry blossoms are going to be in peak bloom. So there's lots of applications for this kinds of information. And then finally, it's important, we feel like, for folks to know what this word is. So the 3 planks of our strategic plan are to advance science, support decisions, and then communicate and connect. And that's the part that really intersects well here. It's a lot of, actually, it's threaded throughout everything that we do, because the primary way in which we build the data that are used to support science and decision making is through a big program that we run called Nature's Notebook, that is a citizen science program, which basically means, and that citizen science is a term that is sometimes debated, sometimes preferred or not preferred, but basically it's a default term for when you're involving folks that haven't necessarily undergone formal training in the sciences, in participating in the scientific process in some form. And most often that looks like them helping contribute observations of some form. It can also be where they're helping form a question, helping to analyze that data, or even communicating about what the results were from a project. And we actually try and involve folks of all different ages and all different backgrounds in every stage of that process. As you can probably expect, the biggest way in which people participate is in the collection of data. We try to make it really easy. It's not easy, but we try to make it really easy for people to go outside and make repeated observations of what they are seeing on plants and animals using an app on their phone. And that is building a bigger and bigger database. And we crossed 30 million records just earlier this week. So that's a big milestone. But we also do a lot to try to not just get people to collect data. We also are constantly trying to build the resources that we have and the types of support that we can offer that help shore up the other pieces of that too, meaning helping individuals or groups of folks in identifying reasons why they might want to participate, We don't want them to participate because we want the data. We want them to participate because they have a question in mind that they would like to answer. So for example, we have a lot of nature centers across the country, or master gardener chapters, or schools that choose to engage. And we have a whole process that we coach them through. And what's the question you want to answer? And so for example, up in Phoenix, there's the Sonoran McDowell Conservancy, and they are tracking both flowering and saguaro cacti and the white-winged dove, and when they're present and nesting, because those two species are so important to each other for pollination and food resources at a time of the year where not a lot of other species are providing food resources that the birds depend on. We also, so we do a lot of stuff to kind of support different folks that are participating in the projects. And then we also work hard to make sure that the findings that come out of uses of the data make it out as widely as possible too. So we put a lot of effort into engaging the news media and trying to get them to understand who we are and what we do, and how data that have been collected through our program are used in, again, science and decision-making opportunities. And we keep track of that. We keep close track of all the different media mentions. And then increasingly, whenever anybody says to us something like, your program's really good, or your data helped us make this decision, we actually have a form. We have created a form on our website that we call testimonials, where when someone says something complimentary of that sort, we really encourage them to go formally write it down for us, because we have found how critically important that is to reference when we're pursuing funding, and especially
Anticipating the impact CV and the impact
yes,
journal.
yeah. I walked in on that and I was like, dang it, I should have probably come for the whole session. This is really good. So yeah, maybe I'll stop there, but I'm happy to talk about any of those kinds of angles on broader impacts as well.
Thank you. I'm also now wanting somebody to write a broader impacts plan that says when, about the cherry blossom blooms, and it's, that has to be their, that's their broader impacts plan. Oh,
No,
I'm just kidding.
oh,
I just thought it would be
There
great.
is a whole project.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for our guests. And we invite everybody to move out to the courtyard. We have some snacks and some food, and to continue conversations. And if you've heard something here that like you really want to follow up on that, or if somebody has a good idea that you wanted to ask them about, this is the time. We want you to spend a little bit of time just networking, and it's so great to do it over food and some beverages. So thank you again very much. We will be distributing the slides shortly. All right.